Hey everyone, I'm not sure if this is recording. Hey everyone, hey everyone, hi, it's Naomi Wolf, and um, I'm doing this video with a heavy heart. As I explained in the title, many people have asked me to comment on where we're at in terms of my essay, my Guardian essay in 2007 called The 10 Steps to Fascism, or Fascist America in 10 Easy Steps. That essay made the case that every dictator or would-be dictator, whether on the left or on the right, does the same 10 things, takes the same 10 steps in closing down an open society. And that, I wrote this in 2008 under George Bush, that I saw that we were in the process of moving through those 10 steps at that time. Sadly, everything I predicted in that book has come true. I wish that it hadn't. I wish it were otherwise. And people keep asking me to update the 10 steps for where we are now. So I've really resisted. I sort of feel like a deer in headlights. It's very predictable what's going to happen, but I do feel I owe it to my fellow countrymen and women to spell out what history says we can expect in the days and weeks ahead. So this is an essay I wrote, and I'll just lift from it to tell you what's on my mind. The very real coronavirus crisis is being exploited in certain ways as cover for those who wish to erode democracies worldwide and to grab other kinds of power. So right now we're seeing grabs for economic power, power to control and track populations' movements, and new powers to invade privacy. And of course, the origins of these powers are what I explore in my latest book, Outrages. These books connect, The End of America and Outrages. So you can tell what President Trump is likely to do in the next 2 months based on this playbook that all oligarchs use or tyrants use to suspend the democracies. And the coronavirus crisis, which again is very real, is giving him really great cover. But the cover is nonpartisan. Many people around the world are using the coronavirus crisis to erode democracy, to gamify capitalism in their interest, and to suppress liberties and oppress people in other ways. Before we go on, I just want to say I believe in science and medicine. I wear a mask. In no way am I saying this is not a real pandemic, but just as Naomi Klein has pointed out in the shock doctrine, real crises are so useful for anyone in leadership who wants to change the rules. And so what I'm urging us to do is to realize that the pandemic will be over someday, but we need to know that we are returning to a context of freedom, and that the new normal, a phrase that appears alarmingly early in the pandemic and one that never bodes well in history, is not a future in which one crisis has passed, but we've been stripped of our liberties and economic rights forever. So what is authoritarian Trump doing? He is making the kind of use of the pandemic that is predictable if you understand how democracies are killed off. So, I wrote in my 2007 essay about the 10 steps to fascism, drawing on lessons learned from looking at times and places where there were weakening democracies, efforts to erode democracy, and tyrants emerged and seized control. So I looked at Mussolini's Italy in the 1920s, of course, at National Socialist Germany in the 30s, at the Communist Soviet Union, also in the 30s, East Germany in the 50s, Argentina under Pinochet in the 70s, and Marxist China in the 80s. And really, by putting all these together, you really see a blueprint, and readers of End of America will be familiar with this. But those who don't remember or want a refresher, the 10 steps to fascism are: first, invoke a terrifying internal and external enemy. We had terrorism You don't hear very much about terrorism anymore. It wasn't that effective to terrify people into giving up all their liberties, as real as it was and is. Coronavirus is the perfect, terrifying internal and external enemy for a power grab. Create secret prisons where torture takes place. The third step is to develop a thug or paramilitary caste, not answerable to citizens. Fourth is to set up an internal surveillance system. Fifth is to infiltrate and harass citizens groups. Six is to engage in arbitrary detention and release. Seven is to target key individuals. Eight is to control the press. 9 is to cast criticism as espionage and dissent as treason. And 10 is to subvert the rule of law and to declare martial law. So it is no secret, as I'm reading these 10 steps, I'm sure that anyone can identify very clearly how these 10 steps have been manifesting in the recent administration. I mentioned that coronavirus is the perfect internal and external enemy, but we also have Antifa and, of course, white supremacist extremism as terrifying internal and external enemies, growing more and more terrifying. Secret prisons where torture takes place. Obama promised to close Guantanamo. Guantanamo is still open, still outside the rule of law, but the development in Portland in which protesters were taken into unmarked vans by people in uniform who were not identifiable as police, that is a very serious new step, because that's exactly how in 1933, in the 20s, black shirts and then brown shirts managed to terrorize the public. They would abduct people, basically, or they would beat people up, take them into cellars, kind of in a very kind of handmade way, terrorize people in places out away from the rule of law, or create environments like downtown Portland that are kind of outside the rule of law. 3 is develop a thug caste or paramilitary force. Many of you know that President Trump has been closely working with Eric Prince, who's the head of, it used to be Blackwater, then it was called Academy, then it was called She or XI, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. But he's surrounded by people who aren't even Secret Service, who are contractors. But leaving that aside, he's whipping up and encouraging people to become militias. And militias are really, really dangerous. You really don't want to live in a society that has paramilitary forces as opposed to domestic police. That's what happened in Rwanda, in Liberia, in Sierra Leone, many countries in Latin America. When you start to have armed thugs roaming the streets in groups, the rule of law is very quick to break down, and there's nothing good. People on the left are like, go riot, loot. People on the right are too. In the name of patriotism or in the name of Black Lives Matter or whatever both of these sides are doing, it's a terrible, terrible thing to yield to the temptation of, because once you have, again, thugs in the streets, policing breaks down, people become terrified, and the people who suffer most are women and children. But it is, once there are paramilitary forces in the streets, there is a hair's breadth left to democracies to restabilize themselves. So don't support that. Number 4 is to set up an internal surveillance system. Well, I'm sure track and trace is very useful medically, but what it also does when this pandemic is over is that it will have created a completely 360-degree surveillance system domestically and globally. That data is forever, and the companies like McKinsey that are getting the contracts for track and trace systems, those contracts are for 7 years. Even in Portland, when a loved one went to get a coronavirus test, that you click through, you have to register online. through Rite Aid, but it doesn't go to Rite Aid, which is bound by HIPAA, which protects your privacy. It goes through Google, and the terms and conditions make you hand over your data to a third party. That data is no longer private. So what's happening right now is that coronavirus is giving gigantic corporations in league with governments, but even meta-governmental, permanent access to your most intimate data in a way that allows them to really follow you on your phone. Next is facial recognition, know who your friends are, create social network maps. There will be an end to the pandemic, but all of our privacy will be completely mapped out, and all of our personal data will be hacked basically by this pandemic, and the use is made of it by companies harvesting our data. But it also gives people like would-be authoritarians, if they have access to that data, they can just create a list of dissidents and round up the dissidents, or they can infiltrate groups of people who they can see in real time gathering together to create a protest or to lobby for legislation. It's the easiest way to crush a democracy, to have these track and trace programs, and the technology now exists. I've seen it where you'll see a social map, you'll see all your friends and what their relationships are with each other, and the homes that they own, the addresses connected to people. It will be almost impossible for a group of people to meet privately when this is over if we keep handing over our data. Target key individuals. The president calls out, journalists by name. The president singles out opposition leaders, and he has surrogates like Tucker Carlson just threatened to out Chris Cuomo after there was a secret recording that he reported about. Jeanine Pirro, a Fox News commentator or Fox commentator, said that something might happen to Joe Biden before the election. These are surrogates, right? These people aren't freelancing. This is how campaigning works. These are surrogates who are tasked with delivering threatening messages or singling out individuals to silence them by threatening to expose them, threatening to embarrass them, blackmailing them, and even threats of violence. Control the press. We've seen less and less access of the press to actual information, and targeting of the press by the president, the fake news, fake media. 9, cast criticism as espionage and dissent as treason. Well, he's pretty much done that. He calls the press the enemy of the state, and he pretty much identifies, half of the country as treasonous. The other side is doing the same thing, subvert the rule of law. And so this is where we are, and this is why I felt the need to do this video. I hate to do this video because I never wanted to get to step 10, but there's no way around it. We're at step 10. So I do this with a heavy heart. At the point we're at historically, you can absolutely predict what the next 2 and 3 and 4 months are going to look like. And I really hope I'm wrong. I really hope we're all sitting around having champagne and eating chocolate-covered strawberries, 6 months from now, in a robust democracy, in a condition of peace with civil policing and, one person, one vote. I hope that I'm very happy to be completely wrong in what I'm about to say. Sadly, everything I predicted in The End of America has come true. I predicted it 12 years ago. Literally everything has come true. Not because I'm such a genius, but because there is a playbook. Tyrants do certain things for certain outcomes. And as I explained in The End of America, when a democracy closes, it doesn't close arithmetically. It's not like a gradual decline. It really closes geometrically, which means there will be a decline and then a collapse, a plateau and then a collapse, a plateau and then a collapse, and like stair stepping. And once you reach a certain level of collapse, there really is no going back. I mean, going back involves civil war or, I mean, catastrophes that are unbearable to even think about. And it's bloody and it can take years or a generation. So we do not want to go there. But we are at the very last point. There's no other way to say it. And we have almost no time. Um, I, I really, I mean, really the only thing that will stop this at this point is an arrest. Um, I wonder if this video will even see the light of day now that I've said that. But I'm going to go ahead and tell you what to expect. Before I do that, I just want to say, and the essay will go on to say this when it's published, that Trump is not alone in using these steps to fascism. The left is just as capable, and they're engaging in a power grab as well. And we can do another video about that. This is not a partisan point to make at this level with this kind of instability and corruption. Both the left and the right are trying to grab as much power as they can. No one wants to play by democracy's rules. My essay talks about how actually Obama moved the foundations of fascism much more robustly into a whole other level of preparedness for where we are now. I mean, Obama was the one who grew Guantanamo, it made war on whistleblowers, took out an American citizen and his son with a drone, engaged in surveillance, and on and on and on. So this is not a partisan thing. We just happen to have a very good oligarch. Trump is a very bad president in a democracy, but he's an incredibly good would-be oligarch. He understands that he is not playing a democracy game. He's playing the game of a coup, and no one around him on the opposition wants to face that, and that's why they're in a lot of trouble and danger, and why we're in a lot of trouble and danger. So here we go. Based on the playbook of fascism and totalitarianism, here is what you can expect to experience or witness in the next 2+ months. I hope and pray I am wrong. This is how history says events may well unfold. 1. There will be more and more sharply escalating clashes between Antifa, no doubt amplified by provocateurs and infiltrators, and their opponents, also no doubt amplified by provocateurs and infiltrators. People will continue to die. The violence will be more and more spectacular and shocking. It will also become the center of presidential campaign messaging on both sides, as Trump will base the core of his appeal to voters on the mayhem in the streets, and the Democrats will too slowly react and too weakly respond. This will prevent Democrats from showcasing their kitchen table issues and will force them to appear aligned with increasingly brutal and destructive looters and rogue elements. They will fall into the trap, and they will not repudiate the protesters/rioters as they become more and more violent. And I'm not talking about peaceful protesters here. I love peaceful protest. I'm really talking about violent protest and destruction of property and harm to people. 2, there will be a nationwide deployment of federal troops, or DHS specifically, or ICE, to a dozen cities at once. Portland was a test. It was clearly a test. The rollout of federal troops will be sudden and shocking, and will be explained as a response to the violence of, quote, leftist rioters. And I expect that there will be a sudden rollout in 12 to 15 cities at once. And this is such a hallmark of a fascist or totalitarian power grab, the kind of sudden deployment. They really use shock. We'll talk about this some more, but expect things to change very, very quickly with no ramping up. People will be so stunned that it will be difficult for them to process what is happening. Be aware that at this point in a closing society, authoritarian leaders seeking to stage a coup essentially escalate shock and spectacle. The goal is to traumatize and disorient a population. And again, in history, you see this over and over and over. Increasingly, and by the way, do you feel disoriented? I mean, we're already quite disoriented and traumatized. Increasingly, Republican lawmakers will make statements endorsing violence. Louisiana Representative Clay Higgins, for instance, just today stated on Facebook, look, fair warning, if this shows up, picture of a black militia, we'll consider the armed presence a real threat. We being we, the people of Louisiana, I wouldn't even spill my beer. I drop any 10 of you where you stand because some of we, like me, we are SWAT. Nothing personal. We just eliminate the threat. Expect a shower of such statements, then a torrent, till the airwaves are so thick with them that the atmosphere of threat becomes overwhelming. There's going to be more and more of this. And again, don't read these as isolated or random or just some crazy person. I was a political consultant to Clinton and to Gore. When you get these kinds of statements, they are coordinated, right? Even if a tweet is deleted or a post is deleted, someone at a high level in a campaign told that person to do that. And they are not freelancing. So expect a barrage of statements endorsing violence. 4, President Trump threatened to send federal troops to the polls. Expect that either there will be no physical polling places, and coronavirus 19 will be the rationale for that, or that there will be, but that there will be an intimidating armed federal presence at the polls. Mussolini used black shirts at the polls at a comparable point in history, and you should expect that people will be beaten, pushed, or threatened at polling places. Expect, and this is number 5, expect, I hate to say this, energy blackouts, food supply disruptions, checkpoints, travel disruptions, mail disruptions. We're already starting to see that. Internet disruptions. Jared Kushner, as Vanity Fair reported, allowed the coronavirus pandemic to ravage blue states to get a political advantage. This disruption and harming of the population, formerly unthinkable, is happening already, right? Like, if you think this can't happen here, you really need to just look at that Vanity Fair article. He let coronavirus run rampant because they were blue states. While there will be narratives to explain all of these disruptions, events that disrupt business as usual and create chaos and instability will be maximized and will be far more frequent than they have been. The goal in military terms is to, quote, tenderize a population, to exhaust and confuse them, leaving them so worried about basic day-to-day well-being that they can't organize against or even absorb what is happening to them. The homelessness and hunger that the pandemic has brought about will play into the hands of would-be authoritarians, as it did in Germany in the 1920s. And this is number 6. You won't see much of this, but public figures for the next 2 months will be quietly threatened. The threats will be of public exposure or professional ruin, but threats of violence won't be unheard of. Examples are the way Tucker Carlson played a clip of Chris Cuomo, the brother of New York State's governor, secretly recorded at the gym talking to Michael Cohen, his putative friend, about being involved in possible sexual harassment cases. And Carlson noted that, quote, there are many more such recordings. So that's a threat. It's a threat of blackmail. The signal there is, quiet down, tell your brother to quiet down, keep a lower profile, and we won't release the rest of the recordings. Fox News host Jeanine Pirro, more ominously in regard to threats of physical harm, said on television that, quote, something is going to happen to Joe Biden before Election Day. So people should understand such commentators don't freelance, as I said, with statements such as these. They are most likely acting as what a campaign calls surrogates, mouthpieces. And more public figures, politicians, and even journalists will become timid and go silent altogether after being on the receiving end of either quiet or public threats. And just look around you. We're seeing democracy being torched, and the opposition is pretty quiet. They're not going full speed ahead. It's possible that this kind of intimidation is underway already. Number 7, the election will be rife with machines not working, electronic systems malfunctioning, records being hacked, impossible waits at polling places, absentee ballots uncounted, public humiliation of voters. Voters will be continually challenged at polling places. Once the votes are in, Republican lawyers will challenge every vote, and Democrats' lawyers will challenge the challenges. There won't be a president on November 5th, I fear. The vote count will drag on for weeks and then for months. Lawsuits will fly back and forth, dragging out the process. People will become numb awaiting an outcome. 8, I hope you're grabbing a drink by now because it's not going to get better before I'm done. 8, meanwhile, the instability and violence will continue to ramp up. There will be several really shocking, traumatic scenes of carnage or spectacular rampage that leaves everyone stunned. Fires will break out, or arson will be on display, as in the early 30s in Germany. The chaos will give President Trump the excuse to say that events are too unstable to count the votes safely, and that for the safety of everyone, that's the phrase you're going to hear a lot, he must declare a state of emergency. At that point, troops, including perhaps contractors or mercenaries, an army answerable to him and not to the Constitution, will appear in many places at once in U.S. cities. Lockdown will be invoked again, this time not due to a medical crisis, but nominally for the sake of public safety. Sadly, we will have become inured to lockdown, and we will comply. Guns will be confiscated at that point. The White House, this is number 9, I'm almost done. The White House, which has steadily been becoming an armed fortress with fortifications added by President Trump, will be completely militarized. Journalists will no longer be allowed in press briefings. They will be suspended for, quote, public safety. Trump simply won't leave. What recourse will his opposition have at that point? None at all. The state of emergency will extend, and 6 months in, there will be a night of the long knives, quote unquote, when all at once opposition leaders, journalists, editors, union leaders, outspoken clergy get arrested on inflated charges. The protesters kidnapped in unmarked vans in Portland is a preamble to this. After that, there is nothing more to be done. That's how it goes. Those are the steps. That's how step 10 plays out. Again, I hope and I pray I am wrong. I hope and I pray I am wrong. But, I mean, I'm spelling this out so you can look around you and see this is happening. This is not some hypothetical. This is happening exactly the way it's supposed to happen if someone wants to close a democracy and create a dictatorship. You're not going to see goose-stepping, as I said at the end of America, a closing chapter that is much reproduced by male writers without attribution. Democracies don't close visibly, right? The successful closures of a democracy are not usually, people goose-stepping in the street or cannons being rolled into place. It happens incrementally and then in a collapse, incrementally and then in a collapse. And that's what we're seeing. That's what we're seeing all around us. And it's not random. A big mistake people make is assuming that history is random. People are just all acting, out of their emotions or carelessly or because they can't contain themselves. If I weren't a political consultant in my earlier life, I wouldn't know this. I too would think that history was random. But I'm often called a conspiracy theorist. Yeah, it's such a dumb term because if you've worked as a political consultant for a presidential campaign, if you've hung out in the rooms where it happens, that phrase from Hamilton, you know that at the highest levels, that's exactly what people are paid to do, is to orchestrate events on a grand scale without fingerprints. That's what governance is. That's what campaigning is, effectively, right? All the more so if you're trying to close a democracy. You need a lot of people to be coordinated, to be playing their role without fingerprints, without the machinery being visible, so as to bring about an historical outcome. That happens all the time. That is the definition of a conspiracy. So let's abandon that phrasing because it really all it does is keep people from understanding what's happening to them. We are being manipulated in the United States right now. And again, it's not partisan. You know, the left is doing their very best to grab power as well, and doing their very best to suppress freedoms as well in different ways. And I will devote a matching video to that so no one feels I'm leaving them out. But this is so serious, and this is how it's happening. We are in the middle of it. What can you do? You know, honestly, it's gone so far that I barely can tell you what to do, except don't be violent, right? If you are violent, you play into the hands of people who are trying to steal our liberties. Do not be violent. The most effective protests in history are peaceful, long-lasting, exhaustive, laborious, peaceful protests in which people sit on the ground and sing. They do not have clashes. Don't march, don't chant, sit on the ground and sing, disrupt business as usual, engage in economic protest if you want, you know, but keep it peaceful, keep it singing. Do not get drawn into clashes with police. Do not get drawn into masked infiltrators. I realize now how convenient for any would-be oligarch to have everyone be masked, because when people are masked, you can get those infiltrators in there. When people are not masked, you see when there's an infiltrator trying to foment or instigate violence. So that's really something to think about. Be wary, right? Know who is in your protest. Don't be drawn in to destroying property. Don't be drawn into hurting anybody. Don't do it. There's nothing noble about it. What else can I tell you? Read the Constitution. Talk to people you disagree with. Tell everyone to calm down, right? Register to vote. You support the ACLU. But at this point, honestly, we are in the hands of criminals, and criminal activities are underway. It's not partisan. There are criminals on both sides trying to suppress our freedoms, and be very, very vigilant. Take care of yourselves, and know that liberty is worth every fight, every peaceful fight. Thank you. This is Naomi Wolf. The book is The End of America. More recently, if you want to know how these suppressions arose in the first place, my most recent book is Outrages, Sex Censorship and the Criminalization of Love. And the organization I co-founded to bring you easier access to democracy is called Daily Clout. Please meet me on Facebook or Twitter to help us figure this out. Thank you. This is step 10.